No one could have imagined that a nurse, used to saving the lives of others, would one day die herself, return from the afterlife, and dare to speak about what she had seen there. Her story is not a tale or a theory, but the testimony of someone who crossed the boundary that most never come back from. She describes an experience that began with the end of breath and unfolded into a reality more vivid and unsettling than anything she had known before. She insists that death was not the end, that there is more beyond the silence, and that what she discovered carries a message that cannot be ignored. She returned with knowledge that may challenge everything we assume about life, death, and what waits after. Few accounts are as detailed, as striking, and as difficult to dismiss as hers. Today, you will hear her story exactly as she lived it, from the first moment after death to the instant of return to the world of the living. She had a known shellfish allergy and carried an auto-injector for emergencies, so when the reaction hit in 2015, she used the first dose before reaching the hospital. At triage, she struggled to speak and breathe, yet, by her account, the nurse on duty did not grasp the urgency. She was placed in a wheelchair and left in a quiet corridor that led toward the bathrooms and on-call room, out of sight and away from a bed. The breathing tightened, she tilted her head up just to pull in air, and in the end she administered the second injector right there in the ER. It bought only minutes. A high, harsh, narrowing sound began in her throat as the airway closed. A physician heard it from the hallway, rushed her into a room, and the team tried to establish access, but with anaphylaxis, her veins had collapsed and lines were tenuous. They pushed medications by injection, antihistamines, steroids, repeated epinephrine, and kept trying to secure reliable access. When her husband arrived, she was sitting bolt upright, staring upward for breath, and heard someone reassure him there was plenty of time. A moment later, the world drew away like the edges of a fainting tunnel. Voices fell distant, and breathing stopped. A code was called. From there, her perspective shifted. She was no longer inside the body on the bed. She watched the room from above or beside, saw people rush in, saw her husband being moved out, and did not immediately recognize the patient as herself. In the medical sequence that followed, she was intubated, placed on a ventilator, sedated into a controlled coma, and flown by air ambulance to Lexington. A clinician drilled into the shin bone to create intraosseous access for medications, something she had not realized could be done, despite years around emergency care. She would remain under for roughly 5 days, yet consciousness did not feel off. The first thing she remembers is being with her sister, who lived in Wisconsin and was driving at night through heavy rain to reach Kentucky. She saw the car pull under a gas station canopy, saw her sister reach into her purse for the phone, and saw her type a brief promise that she was on her way. After waking, that message was found exactly as she had seen it. Then the scene vanished, and there was only dark. Not dimness, but complete absence of light, without a sense of scale. She could not tell if the space was vast or close to her face. She could not feel herself resting on anything, and her own presence did not feel dense the way a body feels. It was as if nothing supported her, and yet she did not fall. When she tried to move, something held her fast. Breathing felt like a struggle even without lungs. Claustrophobia rose, panic overtook her, and then a heavy sleep descended of its own accord, as if a tide rolled over her. This cycle repeated again and again. Time did not flow normally. If she had to compare it to ordinary time, it felt like years. Close to a decade, spent in that pattern of waking to the dark, fearing she might have died, wondering whether she had ever existed at all. Even considering that perhaps the life she remembered was an invention she had created to endure the isolation of this place. At some point, an impulse came. Lean forward, but not at the waist. Align the whole self like a board and angle it. The moment she did, she discovered she could move in the direction she faced. Far off to the left was a faint region that was not black. She pointed herself toward it and shot forward with alarming speed, unable to see obstacles, hoping the space was open. When she reached the not dark region, there was a boundary. At first it had the feel of glass. She pressed close, trying to look through, and everything on the other side was warped until, with concentration, the view clarified. She could see a hospital room, and on the bed lay her body. To the right, slightly behind the head of the bed near the ventilator, stood her daughter. It felt like summer, which made the flannel shirt her daughter wore seem out of place. From what felt like a distance of many meters, she could make out the weave of the fabric and know its texture without touching it. She could also feel what her daughter felt and understand what she was thinking, an intimacy of awareness that in ordinary life was impossible between them. She surveyed the room as a nurse would, soft restraints to prevent accidental extubation, sedative and other infusions, monitor readings consistent with a critical yet stable patient in a medically induced coma. The assessment was clear and unemotional. Like any bedside check, the situation was precarious, but controlled. Relief came with that thought. Either she would re-enter and recover, or if that failed, whatever trapped her in the dark might at least resolve. She focused on her daughter. The fear she sensed in her, rare for someone so private and self-contained, broke her heart. She reached out to pull her close to hold her, and her hands hit the boundary. Frustration surged. She was pulled back into the dark. When she found herself again, she remembered how to move and went left toward the boundary once more. This time the surface yielded. It felt less like a pain and more like a membrane. Her hand slipped through. Then the other. She pushed forward and crossed to the other side, floating above the bed, looking down at her own face. There were no instructions. She reasoned that if she could wake the body, she would be drawn back into it. She stared, willing the eyes to open. Nothing. She calmed herself and set a smaller goal, a finger, just a twitch. She concentrated on one hand in the sheets and tried to make a single finger move. Nothing. The effort was the most exasperating work she had ever done. Anger rose. She forced it down, afraid that strong emotion would throw her back. Still nothing. Then the pull came anyway, and she slid to the far side of the barrier, not all the way into the deep dark, but held outside the room, shut out from touch. There was no clear path forward. She was left with the oppressive quiet and the knowledge that, however close she had come, she could neither comfort her daughter nor reanimate her own body. The next step, why this space existed and how to get free of it, would come later. Pulled back from the bedside and shut out again, she faced the same suffocating dark. There were no walls, no floor, no horizon. Only awareness and the pressure of being held in place. Then something shifted inside, not a voice with sound, but a knowing that rose from within. The place was not random. It matched the life she had been living after the divorce, the careful retreat from people, the refusal to risk closeness, the way social anxiety had grown until even answering a phone felt like a test. She had worked, kept to herself, and called it safety. Here that safety had taken form. What she had built on Earth had been stored up and reflected back as a kind of cell, a structure made from isolation. Naming it did not free her, but it cracked the surface. The first sign was a sound she knew from childhood winters on Lake Erie. The long, eerie note of ice splitting and racing across the water. That memory arrived with force, and with it the sense of a fissure opening nearby. Where the crack moved, light leaked through, thin at first, then stronger. Something vast approached through that opening. Not a person of ordinary size, but a presence that filled space. It was female in essence and towering in stature. She did not feel hands, yet she was gathered in and held against a chest with an ease that dissolved the panic. Around them spun a field of motion, like a whirl of wind made from living force, and the darkness broke into shards that struck this moving ring and flew off, vanishing as if it had never existed. Calm washed over her in a way that felt physical, not metaphorical. It was like the moment before anesthesia takes hold, when warmth floods the body and resistance is impossible. The instruction to be still did not ask for effort. It created the state it named, spreading from the skin inward. She looked up to see who held her. Eyes like bright green glass met hers. Above them, what first read as flames resolved into the orange red of hair, bright and alive. Recognition was immediate. It was her grandmother. In life, this woman had been a force. She had worked years in a steel stamping plant under conditions that broke people. A co-worker had lost her arm to a machine and been dismissed without help. Outraged, her grandmother had organized where others warned her to keep quiet. The plant's workforce was mostly female, and the men's shops had unions while theirs did not. One night the price of defiance showed itself. A long car, a ride to the Detroit River, a threat. Her body dumped onto a sidewalk before the car sped away. She came home bruised and kept going until the Union existed. That was who she was, unyielding in defense of the vulnerable. Meeting her in this place carried the same sense of protection. Held in those arms, the fear that had knotted her since the first moments in the dark softened. There were no speeches, no theology, only a clear reminder that fit both the woman who spoke and the nurse who listened. She was reminded of a principle she knew. Energy is not created or destroyed. It changes form. Here, it arrived as assurance that death was not a broken line, but a transition. The comfort was not sentimental. It came together with the evidence of her own experience. She was perceiving without a body, thinking without a brain, moving without muscles, and now being steadied by someone who was no longer alive in the ordinary sense, yet present, distinct, and active. The more she accepted what this said about her own condition, the more the environment answered. The darkness that had hemmed her in was no longer solid. It broke into fragments and was swept away by the circling force around her grandmother. Light entered in beams and then as a field. Shapes did not appear, only brightness and the relief of space. For the first time since the ER, she was not fighting for breath. Even though there was no breath to draw, it felt like a release from weight. She understood then why the earlier attempts to force her way back into the body had failed. She realized the state she carried, fear, anger, the iron habit of holding back, matched the enclosure and kept her aligned with it. The moment she owned her part in its construction, a path opened. The crack was not a door someone else made. It was the fracture caused by truth pressing against its container. The presence of her grandmother did not undo the past or erase choices. It made the present bearable enough to choose differently. The sense of family was not vague. Details anchored it. The eyes she had known, the hair, the stature, the unspoken message that strength is not hardness, but the willingness to stand for what matters. It felt like the best of what her grandmother embodied had arrived first to clear away. The relief did not answer every question. It did, however, replace the terror with steadiness and reframe the dark not as punishment from outside, but as a consequence that could be changed by consent and alignment. She stayed in that embrace until the field around them had swept the last of the shards away. Then the holding loosened, and she found herself afloat in light with no edges. There was no push, no command telling her where to go. The quiet did not threaten. It felt like a pause between beats before the next movement, an interval in which she could simply exist without pressure. She did not yet know what would come, only that the prison had been named and broken, that she was not alone, and that what continued beyond breath included love, protection, and a logic that met her where she was. The next encounter, when it arrived, would build on that foundation. Light had replaced the last fragments of darkness when a force moved through everything at once. It was not a sound in the air so much as a deep trembling that ran from the beginning of time to the end of it, like a wave that shook even what did not yet exist. In that shock, she knew she was not alone. What approached was not another soul or guide. It was God. The presence behind all of it, a presence so absolute that her first instinct was to marshal reasons to be worthy. She tried to stack her good deeds in front, to put the better parts of her life on top, but her mind stalled. Years of nursing experience did not arrive as a neat defense. Instead, the presence answered by showing, not telling. The first scene was ordinary, almost embarrassingly small. She was in a checkout line, watching a woman come up short. The woman reached for items to put back. Always the adult's needs first, never the child's. A knot formed in the nurse's stomach because she had been that parent. She covered the difference quietly, and the other woman's shame eased enough for her to accept help. The scene advanced by years. The same woman now volunteered at a food pantry. A mother came in, head down, without enough. The volunteer packed the bags and told her she knew what it felt like. The point was not that a random payment at a grocery store had transformed the world, but that purpose is exact and local. The right act at the right moment propagates, passing through people who recognize themselves in each other's need. Then came the hard part. She had carried a private verdict against a colleague, a nurse whose care she considered unreliable. She had never gossiped about her. She simply held a constant stream of negative judgment in her heart and treated it as harmless so long as she kept it unspoken. Now the story widened. She was shown the colleague's upbringing, the prolonged abuse, the damage that might have produced cruelty or criminality, and somehow had not. Measured against that history, the colleague's choice to dedicate her life to caring for others looked less like failure and more like an act of resistance. The lesson was precise. Thoughts are not weightless. The continual current of condemnation a person emits has an effect. It can drag on another's efforts, making it harder for them to become who they are meant to be. The correction was equally precise. Seek the good in people and strengthen it. Point to what is working and help it grow. After the review, the environment itself seemed to respond to intention. Thought and form were not separated by time. When she imagined a flower, it was there, real, textured, and alive. Each bloom had a distinct fragrance and a psalm, and the colors did not stop at the edges of the petals. They radiated outward as if light were spilling from them. Nothing clashed. Each part held its own line, yet everything blended in a harmony that made sense the moment it was perceived. If she wondered whether movement could pass through water without water resisting, the answer arrived by demonstration. She rose with the presence over a stretch of water, dipped beneath the surface, and came out still dry, still moving through air. Birds crossed near them as if distance had no claim on choreography. It felt less like spectacle and more like education by direct experience. Here, ideas are not proposals, they are realities on contact. She noticed how the presence interacted with her without argument. There were no doctrinal arguments, no insistence on labels. There was only a self-disclosure of absolute being that required nothing from her to be true. In that light, the earlier panic and urgency looked like habits from a smaller room. She had insisted on leading with a defense. The presence had led with context. She had tried to prove she was good. The review showed her where good had already flowed and where harm had been done invisibly by thought alone. The logic of it was both intimate and impersonal, exactly fitted to her life, yet framed by principles that did not bend for anyone. Somewhere in that sequence, she experienced a surge that was not information in words, but comprehension as a state. It moved through her like warmth and clarity at once, lighting pathways in the mind she had not known existed. Questions she had carried for years snapped into alignment, and things she had never studied were obvious. She understood not only what she had been shown, but why it worked that way. Later, after returning to ordinary life, she would not be able to keep that level of knowing. It was as if the doors had been opened for a moment and then closed again. That level of knowing did not remain. But in that moment, the coherence of everything was unmistakable. The presence did not force conclusions. It met her where she was and then enlarged the room. If a life can be weighed, it is not by tallying impressive episodes for display. It is measured at the point of contact. A grocery line, a private thought about a coworker, the decision to encourage what is fragile but good in another person. If creation responds to thought, then thought must be tended, because it does not stay inside the thinker. And if the ground of reality simply is, then the only honest stance is to align with it rather than pretend to manage it. She came away from that encounter with the sense that truth here was both simple and demanding. What you hold in your heart becomes a force. What you do in small, present moments travels farther than you think, and what stands behind life does not argue its existence. It reveals itself by being. The flight over and through the water, the flowers that sang, the review that honored a quiet act and exposed a quiet harm, all of it fit together as one teaching delivered in scenes instead of sentences. The calm after the encounter did not last long. A surge of courage rose, and she put forward the one question she had avoided all her life. Where had the Creator been when her children were hurting? The answer did not come as an explanation, but as a scene set years ahead. She was sitting with her son on the bleachers, while her oldest grandchild, now 5, ran the soccer field in bright sunlight. She could feel the warmth on the child's skin, hear the rhythm of feet on grass, and then her son turned and promised to be the kind of father he himself had needed. The weight of it landed. The pain of their generation had become a turning point rather than a permanent wound. The chain was breaking in him, and the future moving through that child would not be a repeat of the past. Later, back in ordinary time, that moment would reproduce itself precisely. The game, the age, the sentence spoken aloud. For her, this confirmation marked the line between doubt and trust. What followed moved from the scale of family to the scale of design. She and the presence accelerated along spirals that felt both microscopic and endless, as if they were traveling inside the code of her life. The motion was so fast it brushed the skin like wind, and then it stopped at a particular locus. She was asked to look closely. In the region scientists often call non-coding, the place sometimes dismissed as junk, she recognized a signature. It was not a metaphor or a symbol to her. It was a direct recognition, the way a face is known without being described. The meaning was stark. The source was not only around her, he was in her, as certainly as a parent's lineage can be found in a test, whether or not anyone acknowledges it. The implication redefined identity. She was not accidental. She'd been thought of, willed, and made for a purpose, the way a craftsman commits to a piece before the first cut is made. With that, the offer beneath all the revelation became plain. She could remain in that reality, or she could return and finish the work she had left undone. Her first impulse was to stay. The love in that place did not require merit. It was steady and absolute, and for a moment she wanted nothing else. But she looked honestly at how she had lived. The fortress she had built from fear after the divorce, the gradual withdrawal from joy, the careful refusal to risk being known, and she hated the thought of quitting in the middle. She had not yet torn down the wall she had raised around her life. She had not yet used what she was given to serve the purpose she now understood. The decision formed itself. Go back, dismantle the isolation, live out what had been shown. As soon as she consented to return, the distance from the presence widened. She felt it like a physical separation and begged to remember, certain that without memory, she would have no hope to carry. She woke in the hospital room with a nurse at the bedside. She told anyone who would listen what had just occurred, but the urgency sounded like delirium to them. When the lights dimmed and the room quieted, the presence reappeared, not as a blur of emotion, but as a concrete certainty that filled the space. She startled and then laughed with relief. The message was simple enough to carry and heavy enough to live by. She had been made on purpose. The life she returned to was not a placeholder, and the task was to speak and act from that truth. The clarity of those minutes became a compass for the months that followed. Returning did not mean instant ease. Over the next 2.5 years, she endured a series of respiratory failures, 18 in total by her count, each episode sudden and severe enough to force another intubation. The staff began to recognize her face. Crash carts rolled when she crossed a threshold. There was just enough time each time to reach a hospital and have the tube placed. Living under that threat was exhaustion for her and everyone she loved. During the 18th event, she slipped out again and laid out her demand: end it or end her. She could not keep doing this. The reply was not the comfort she expected. The problem, she was told, was not on the other side. She had promised to live and had not done it. Opportunities and people had been set in her path, and she had kept the old vows to safety. If she meant what she had vowed, she needed to start saying yes. It sounded absurd in the moment, almost like a riddle, but she returned and tested it. A friend who regularly checked on her invited her yet again to speak at a support group associated with the International Association for Near-Death Studies in Cincinnati. She had always declined before, overwhelmed by social anxiety and the reflex to avoid public exposure. This time the yes came out before she could stop it. The friend was stunned. She told him to hang up quickly before she invented a reason to reverse herself. From that day, she committed to accepting the invitations that aligned with the purpose she had glimpsed, even when the acceptance terrified her. By her report, the cascade of respiratory crises stopped. Life did not become effortless. But the pattern that had stalked her after the hospital began to settle. Medical explanations gradually took shape, and the foundation of her days shifted from bracing for collapse to building towards service. The principle that governed this turn was not grand. It was the same scale she had been shown in the life review: specific, present, actionable. Say yes to the thing that matches the assignment you know you have. Offer yourself to the moment in front of you instead of hiding behind old defenses. Guard the thoughts you carry so they do not bind others to your fear. In practice, it looked like returning calls, accepting a podium, sitting with people who needed exactly the story she had to tell, and allowing the wall around her life to come down brick by brick. The nurse, who had once measured days by vital signs, learned to weigh them by consent and courage. The scene on the bleachers, the trace in her DNA, the presence in the recovery room, the string of hospitalizations, and the first trembling yes to speak. All of it fit together as one answer to the question she had asked. Where were you when my family was breaking? The answer, as she came to live it, was not a speech from above, but a future in which love moved through them, because someone refused to keep the past in charge. She does not argue beliefs, she reports what happened and what followed. The center of her lesson is blunt. The darkness matched the life she had built: withdrawal after divorce, fear of contact, a careful retreat into safety that hardened into isolation. Owning that changed the scene and opened the way forward. From there, her conclusions stay practical. Purpose is not a grand slogan, but the next right action, exactly where you stand. The small episode at a checkout line mattered because it was timely and human, and because it continued through another person years later. By the same measure, thoughts are not private leftovers. They carry weight. Her quiet stream of judgment toward a colleague, never spoken aloud, still pressed against that woman's efforts. The correction she brought back is to watch the inner stance, look for what is good in people, and strengthen it. For a skeptical audience, she points to two anchors that, for her, served as personal confirmations that made it hard to dismiss as only a dream. While in a medically induced coma, she witnessed her sister's late-night drive and saw the exact message typed during a storm. Much later, she sat at a soccer game and heard her son speak the very sentence she had been shown years before. The rule that governed her return is equally concrete. Say yes to the life you were given. After 2.5 years of repeated respiratory failures and emergency intubations, she reversed the old habit of declining and accepted an invitation to speak for a near-death support group. From that decision onward, by her account, she reports the episodes stopped and her condition gradually stabilized. Part of why her story is hard to dismiss is the clinical texture she carries into it. Monitors read as a nurse would read them, sedatives identified by use, soft restraints on her wrists, an intraosseous line drilled into the shin, a ventilator humming, an airlift to Lexington, days in a medically induced coma. Taken together, her conclusions are simple and demanding. Dismantle the walls you build around yourself. Tend your thoughts, act where you are, and when the right door opens, step through it. Dear friends, who would you like to meet first after death? And why? Do you believe in life after death? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. By doing so, you'll be supporting my channel, which truly needs your help. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.